DreAllDay.com.
You're now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy, one book, one show. We got a whole framework on this. We got several frameworks, and you are listening to the daily masterclass that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day. Welcome to the show. And today's topic, you knew this was coming. You knew eventually I was going to get to it. Today we are getting to it. Today we're going to talk about critical race theory. Now again, you knew this episode was coming, the same way you knew the Black Lives Matter episode was eventually going to come. I talked about that. If you didn't hear the Black Lives Matter episode is, let me find it. That was episode number, I'll tell you in a second as I'm pulling these things up. It's episode number 1825, Black Lives Matter. But this one, critical race theory, has been a hot topic politically and socially over the last few months, even though, just like Black Lives Matter, social justice and other ideas, it's actually far from new. It's just new to the public consciousness to the point that it's become a trending topic and everyone's talking about it. So I have personally been reading about and listening to people talk about critical race theory for some time, since probably the last 2 years. And I have finally, the reason why the episode is today, I finally gathered my thoughts enough that I can speak on it. So let's get right into it. Again, the topic is critical race theory. And before I do that, let me tell you that I have a text number where you should text me and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, your feedback on what you heard today. My number is 305-384-6894. Again, 305-384-6894. And we'll get into everything that needs to be said, all the context necessary as we get into the point. So point number one, the topic once again is critical race theory. First, let's define what critical race theory means. The interesting thing about this whole conversation on CRT is that I wanted to make sure I could get a clear definition of what it was before I did a masterclass on it, because what I've been seeing, especially as I read people talk about it in the debates and the back and forth, and people are arguing on different extremes of the point, is that people are having all these different interpretations of what exactly critical race theory is. So some people are saying, well, critical race theory is just a way to teach history. And then other people are saying, well, those are the advocates. And then the detractors are saying, well, critical race theory, what it is a way to make Black people feel like victims. And other people are saying, well, it's a way to make white people, and especially kids, because a lot of this is what's being taught in schools. It's not really about what the adults are doing with it. It's what not adults like who are out of school, but adults such as teachers are teaching kids, that even white kids, that something's wrong with you because you're white. You are inherently guilty just by the fact of being white, even though you didn't actually do anything wrong. So I want to make sure we get a clear definition of what critical race theory is. So let's start with a definition that I got from Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, so I believe this is a trusted source. I believe that they are not leaning one way or another. Britannica says, quote, critical race theory is an intellectual movement and loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not a natural, biologically grounded feature of physical distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed, i.e. culturally invented, category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theorists hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans, close quote. Now, as I said, this part was the hardest part of me getting to this masterclass, because the opposing sides have such differing definitions of what exactly critical race theory is. And the thing is, they can't even debate on what it is critical race theory is. So how are they ever going to come together? They never will. They're not trying to, but even if they were trying to, they can't if they can't even agree on what we're talking about. So I've seen advocates, as I said, say that it's teaching history. People are others saying, well, it's hate and shaming of white people. Both are extremes, but it's how far apart they are on it that really is what makes this conversation so challenging for many people, just as with Black Lives Matter. Now, I spoke on Black Lives Matter when their actions and lack of results really started to become clear. Now, critical race theory is different from Black Lives Matter in that it is much more slippery because the very word itself or phrase itself, it's a theory. Definition of a theory is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. In other words, with critical race theory being a theory, it's a system of ideas that is intended to explain something. That makes it very, very slippery, meaning any of us can pretty much interpret that however we want to. And this is why it's being interpreted so widely the way that it is. So let me give you my interpretation based on the definition that came from, again, Encyclopedia Britannica. The first half of the definition I'm good with. They say that critical race theory is a framework of legal analysis based on the premise that race is not some biological feature, but it's something that was actually socially constructed. In other words, people invented race. That part I agree with. I agree that race is invented, that we have people of different colors and different shades, and we started categorizing them, I guess just to make it more simple for human beings to understand. That part I agree with, but now the rest of the definition says this, that race was invented to, well, not invented, but used to oppress and exploit people who are not white. That's the next part of the definition. That part I do not agree with, and we'll get to that. Then it says the critical race theorists, people who are into critical race theory, they believe that legal institutions in the United States, their function is to maintain inequalities between people who are white and people who are not white, specifically African Americans. I would rather say black people because I've never been to Africa and nobody in my family, as far as I know, has ever been to Africa. So I'd rather consider myself a black person than an African American. But anyway, different conversation, maybe not even necessarily for a different day. So first half of this definition, I agree with that. Yes, race is a social construct. We made it up. And the other one, just like time, is made up. And the other part, though, is that race was designed or used to exploit people of color. That's the main reason that race exists, and that the institutions in the United States are made to create and maintain political inequalities between whites and blacks. That I do not agree with. Now, all that being said, that's all of point number one. Let's move on to point number two. And I'll explain why I agree with one part and don't agree with others. Point number two, the topic, once again, we are discussing critical race theory. Here's the key about critical race theory that I got from a tweet posted by a woman named Allison Heap, H-E-A-P-E, and that's Allison with one L. This is what she said. She said, when teachers reply that, hey, they defend themselves by saying, hey, I'm not teaching critical race theory, what they often mean is, I'm not teaching a theory. What I'm doing is just teaching facts, hashtag facts, about the world and its history. Now, close quote. And this is what I mean. When I say, and I'm out of Allison's tweet right now. So when I say that the people who are advocates of critical race theory, often what they're saying is, listen, all critical race theory is teaching history. So people who are trying to be, especially I see this on Twitter all the time, people try to be so, what's the word? People just try to be so smarmy, and everyone's trying to, clap back at each other on Twitter. So they'll say something. Everybody's trying to get their one-liner in. So people will say, oh, well, anybody who's against critical race theory, they're just against history. Or, oh, so now we can't teach history in school. Oh, so now you don't want your kids to know about history. Listen, we already have history class. All right, I went to school, and critical race theory, I never heard that phrase when I was in school, and we had a history class. Every year I had a history class. So no, critical race theory is not, quote, just teaching history, close quote. That makes no sense. No, that's not what it is. So continuing what Allison says, she said, a teacher will say, I'm not teaching critical race theory. I'm just teaching facts about the world and teaching facts about the history of the world, specifically American history. But here's the key point, and this is again from Allison. She said, what these teachers view as a fact is influenced by critical race theory. So now I'm out of what Allison said. Now it's me talking again. This is the key distinction about critical race theory. Since it's a theory, it is influencing how people are looking at facts and which facts they're choosing to address and how they're deciding to talk about those facts. That's what critical race theory is doing. It's influencing the way people talk about certain things, which things they talk about, and which things they leave out. That's the key about critical race theory. So the key indictment of critical race theory is that these teachers who are buying into it, they are teaching students, and it's not just the teachers, as a matter of fact, it's the schools and the school districts that are telling the teachers what they can and can't do. Because teaching is a job, and you have a boss, and there's someone who's telling you what you can do and what you can't do, and what you have to do and what you cannot do. So those things matter as well. So when I say teachers, I'm talking about the teachers, the schools, and the school districts, just to be clear. So the key indictment of critical race theory, if anyone wanted to go against it and trash it, is to say critical race theory is teachers teaching students that policies, governments, and systems in America specifically are shaping and creating and maintaining racial imbalances, which lead to a lack of equality, which leads to things like white privilege and all these other negative things and social injustice and racial imbalance and all these other things that you've heard people talk about ad nauseum over the last year plus. Now, in episode number 1533, by the way, I told you how a black person can combat white privilege in a strategic way. So if you have not listened to that episode, again, that's episode 1533, how to combat white privilege strategically for black people. But this is the key idea about critical race theory that you need to understand, whether you agree or disagree with it. Again, I'm going to say it one more time, is that the key indictment is that the teachers are teaching students that policy, government, and systems have created and shaped racial imbalances, and that's what leads to lack of equality, which leads to white privilege and everything else. I'm out of that. Now, I'm black. I do not like this idea, and I'm going to tell you why. This idea that the system, policies, government systems, are shaping racial imbalances. They're creating and shaping them, and that leads to all the other negative results between black people and white people. This thought, whether you agree with it or not, is indoctrinating black students, because again, this is happening in schools. That's why this has become a debate. Is indoctrinating black students that they are disadvantaged and set up to lose. That's what it's doing. If I'm a teacher and I'm telling my class that, hey, the government has these systems and they did this back in the day and they've done this a long time ago, and now look at the outcomes, and this is why white people have this much and black people have this much, and white people a lot and black people a little. What is that? What's going on in the mind of that 8-year-old black child? Oh, okay, well, I'm black. So that means, all right, the system is set up to make me lose. The system is set up to make the white person have more than me. And what's the little white kid thinking? Okay, so the system is set up for me to have more than this person. Damn, I have an advantage that I didn't even earn. Maybe there's something inherently wrong with me. And again, we're teaching this to kids who are not old enough. They don't have all the mental faculties to look at this and critically discern, all right, am I being told some bullshit by this adult, or is this something that I should actually agree with? They're 7, 8 years old, 12, 13, 15 years old. They don't have the maturity to decide that for themselves. The teachers are the ones who are supposed to be guiding them into how to think, not what to think. This is the biggest indictment of critical race theory, is that it's telling people how to think and not what to think. And it's indoctrinating these black kids that they're set up to lose. So now many of them are going to go out into life thinking, okay, I'm not supposed to have more than a white person. And if you really think that, if you subconsciously believe that, your life will reflect it through your actions, that you're not supposed to have as much as the white person. So you may end up self-sabotaging your own life because it's been indoctrinated in you since you were 8 years old that the system is set up for you to lose. And if you're white, you're walking around carrying guilt that is not your fault, and you might not even understand it, but because your teacher, the trusted adult that you've been listening to for 8 hours a day for how many years you were in school, from kindergarten through, let's say, high school, all right, this is what they've been telling you. Each one of them told you the same thing. This is my challenge with critical race theory. And the white kid, so I already told you why the black kid is thinking that. The white kid believes I have baked in advantages that black people don't. And that can explain the performance/result gap between black and white. So any kid is looking at that. And if a black kid is underperforming, they can say, oh, it's because of the government and the policies and the system. It has nothing to do with the fact that I didn't study. It's not about the fact that I'm not working hard enough. Well, the system is set up for me to fail. So anytime black kids are failing, it's probably because of the system, not because I need to work harder in school. And a white kid who succeeds, oh, it's because the system is set up for me to succeed. So I might not actually be good, even though I'm the valedictorian, I'm #1 in the class. It's just because of the system. Maybe I'm just not as good as I thought I was. The system just set me up to be successful. I didn't earn it. And so who is this helping? That's the question that I have. So this leads to, again, myriad results. One is black people have lowered expectations because critical race theory is telling them that the system is set up for you to lose. So, of course, if you keep telling someone over and over again they're supposed to lose, and they trust you, they're going to start thinking they're supposed to lose. Their expectations get lowered. Now, this leads to the victim/excuse mindset. Then you get black people expecting, since the system is set up for them to lose, now you have black people who will expect special treatment and a different set of rules for them because the system is already against them. So if the system's already against me as a black person and I'm at the bottom of my class, well, I need to be boosted up to at least the middle of the class because the system was against me, remember? So I'm not supposed to be last. The system set that up. So now you got to give me some extra privileges that I didn't even earn because the system is against me. I mean, your teacher's been telling you this your whole life. These are just to name a few examples. Now, what happens to white people because of critical race theory? A white kid, again, these are kids. I'm not talking about an adult. I'm not talking to you who's an adult listening to this and you can discern for yourself when someone's telling you some bullshit and decide whether to accept it or not. We're talking about a kid who's in school who has been told by their parents, listen, sit down, shut up, listen to the teacher knows what they're talking about. You are entrusting that teacher. All right, that teacher is indoctrinating your child with whatever they're telling you every single day. So I 100% understand a parent not accepting the fact that this is being taught to their kids, again, no matter what color the kid is, because there's no positive outcome for any of this. So the white kid is being told that they should be condemned or they need to condemn themselves just by the fact of being born white. The kid didn't do anything to a black kid. All they did was go to school and listen to the teacher like they were told to do. But because you're white and now that the teacher is telling you this, something's wrong with you. You have done something wrong just by being the color skin that you are. That you should be pulled down in order to make the game easier for other people. And I'll tell you something funny. It's actually not funny, but it is funny. I saw this idea, last thing that I just said, that a white kid should be, or a kid who has certain privileges, so to speak, should be pulled down in order to make the game more fair for other people. I saw somebody say this. And this is a person whose knowledge and intelligence I respect. It was my sister, Dre Baldwin, who is a college professor. She has a law degree, she has a sociology degree, and I think something else. She has and a PhD. I believe she has all three. And she was saying this, and she was talking about students. She said, what I'm saying, and she said this specifically, she said this explicitly, that we need to pull those kids down to make the game more fair and even for the other kids who don't have the same privileges. She said this in so many words. And I remember when she said that, and I didn't say anything back to her because it's useless. I mean, if Latoya had the fortitude to go back and forth with me in a conversation, you would hear her on this show. She hasn't been on the show because she just doesn't have it. And I'm not saying that as an indictment of her, that everybody's different. But anyway, the point is, I didn't say anything, but when I read that, and I'll tell you right now what I was thinking, that goes against everything that I stand for and that everything my life's work is about. Is to look at another person who is further ahead than you for whatever reason and to say, oh, that person, no, let's pull them down and pull them back so that they're tied with me. So now it's more fair and I got a better chance to win. Bullshit. Fuck that. If someone's ahead of you and they're doing better than you for whatever reason, whether it's not your fault, it's not their fault, something their parents did, something your parents did, it's just set up in a certain way that they're ahead of you at this point in time. No, don't pull them backwards. What you need to do is pull yourself up. You need to work on your fucking game, make yourself better so that you can get to the level that they're at and maybe even surpass them. And if that means you need to work 10 times harder than them or be 10 times better than them to get to the same position that they're at, then so be it. Why? Because life is unfair. My sister and I grew up in the same household, same two parents, went to the same schools in elementary school, same middle school, then we went to different high schools. And we ended up with completely different academic outcomes. From the very beginning, we had different academic outcomes. I was pretty good in school. I mean, I had the intelligence. It was obvious, and my teachers would even say that I had it, but I wasn't as focused on school and academics the way my sister was. My sister was like a straight A student through like fucking high school. She was straight A's everywhere. She went to the best schools. She went to the elementary school, went to the neighborhood school. She skipped the grade, went to the best middle school in the city, then went to the best high school in the city, and then got a full scholarship to a Ivy League university, got the degree there, and then went and got a master's degree and got a law degree and has a PhD. All right, I don't have any of that shit. And I did not go to an Ivy League school. And I didn't have straight A's. I never did, not once. And I didn't skip a grade. I didn't do any of those things. And we grew up in the same house with the same parents, and we're only a year apart in age. How do we end up with such completely different outcomes? Is it because of the system? Or is it because of choices that I made and choices that she made? You tell me. I mean, we can't blame critical race theory for it, can we? So if two people who grew up in the same house can both end up creating what society would call success, but have completely different ways of going about it, if they can't get the same outcomes, how can you expect a white kid and a black kid, or whites and blacks in general, to come up with the same outcome? It doesn't make logical sense. But again, these people, it's not about logic to them. It's a religion to them. And you take this away from them, what else do they have to stand on? Do they have any other substance to speak on if you take this away? And I'm not saying specifically about Latoya. Hopefully she has some other substance to stand on. All those degrees, I hope she got something. But you take this away from a lot of these people, they ain't got nothing left. I mean, again, you look at it that way and you start to see people in a different light. But if someone has an advantage against me in a competition, that gives me the incentive that I need to get better and close that gap. I mean, that's what work on your game is about. That's what the third day is about. That's what the separation day is about. That's what being 10 times better is all about. I talked about this in episode 1177, Insight, the key from going to 1x to 10x. And sometimes in life, you just need to be 10 times better than somebody else. And that's just what it is. Episode 1661, you might have to work 10 times harder. That's the name of the topic. Episode 1661, make sure you go listen to it, because this is a reality of life. It's not about your race. This is just a reality of life. Let's move on to point number 3. Today's topic, once again, we are dissecting critical race theory. The overall issue with critical race theory, even if you agree with it and say so what to everything that I shared in point number 2, for Black Americans, what's next? Let's say you like critical race theory. Where do we go from here? There was slavery. Slavery's over. There was Jim Crow. Jim Crow's over. The civil rights movement, that's over. We got civil rights. There's the voting, the suffrage. We got that. We can vote now. We're getting into colleges and hired for jobs. There are Black people who are getting into colleges and getting hired for jobs that they are not qualified for because of affirmative action, all designed to, quote, balance things out, close quote, even though statistically it's proven that that does not work, but they keep doing it. I have personally, person you're listening to right now, I have traveled the world. I've been to many places. I know people from all over the world. Understand that there is nowhere on the map, nowhere, that is better for a Black person than the United States of America. Nowhere. You don't want to live anywhere else. I talked about this in the episode about how travel makes you appreciate living in America a lot more. I talked about this in episode 1864. And now, saying all that, you might still say, so what? Yeah, I get it, Dre. You're right. I agree with you, but America still has work to do. America still can be better for Black people. America still can improve in many ways the experience of Black people who live here. To this, I reply, when does the finger get pointed in the mirror? That's my question to the supporters of critical race theory. When does the finger stop getting pointed out the window and start getting pointed in the mirror? When do you do that? Now, again, as I explained to you many times before, I'm going to keep saying this, is that it's not about logic and reason and facts to these people who are into these things. It's about emotion. It's a religion for them. And for many of them, it's a career. If you take this away, what else do they have? Is there any substance behind this? Often the answer is no. But you have to look at each person on a case-by-case basis to decide. So anyone who agrees with the critical race theory idea, and you listen to everything I said here so far, you say, so what? America still needs to improve the experience for black people. My question to you is, when do you start pointing the finger in the mirror at ourselves? When does it stop being white people need to do this, the government needs to do that, the system needs to change this way? When is that going to change? I told you in episode 1807, white people ain't our business. Listen, how much are they sitting around talking about us? How much are we sitting around talking about them? It's not that all these race talkers talk exclusively about what everyone else needs to do. There's never any talk about what black people can do with and for ourselves. None of those people get promoted. None of those people you see getting pushed out on the stage and made a big deal about. Only the people who talk about what white people need to do and what the government needs to do. Now, this is why we have so many of these individuals, because they see the opportunity for themselves. And I mean, they got to eat too. I mean, food, clothing, shelter ain't free. So I understand you doing what you got to do. But at the same time, where's the line between doing what you got to do and also having some integrity to your points, some integrity to your principles? I mean, does that matter? The problem with all of this is when you give unearned advantages to someone or to a group of someone's who lack the human capital to use those advantages get wasted. This has been proven. And if you think that the human capital is already there, because there are black people who are saying, well, Dre, look, the human capital already exists in the black community, then they just need more space and opportunity. My question is, why are you still talking about the government, the system, and white people if the human capital is already there? If the human capital is there, opportunities can be created by the person who possesses the capital. All right, they don't need anyone to do anything for them. Remember, work on your game principle number 4, personal initiative. Make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. If you already have the human capital, then we shouldn't be talking about the government and the system and racism. We are already seeing big platforms being given to and created for race hustlers who lack substance other than saying or reiterating why Trump, white supremacists, and systems are bad. All right, we see that already, right? We are not using our best human capital right now because we're giving platforms to these clowns who allegedly are representing us. That's what we're giving our platforms to. And when you give platforms to people like that, they have influence. And who are they influencing? The next wave of people to come up and do the exact same thing. This is what people said about Donald Trump. Like, hey, Donald Trump may not have necessarily done anything bad, but the way that he represents himself and the way that he talks about, because he's the president, he's influencing people. And as a president, he shouldn't represent himself like that because he's going to influence other people to be like that. And it's going to create a whole wave of things that we don't want. Fine. If that's how you felt about Donald Trump. I had people tell me that to my face. That's why they didn't like Trump. Not necessarily about anything he did policy-wise or anything he did tangibly. Just the way that he was presenting himself was setting a bad example for other people. Fine. If that's how you believe, if that's what you believe, tell me what example are the race hustlers setting for the next wave of black people? To grow up to make everything that they talk about what the government and the system and white people are doing wrong and they get paid off of it, or who are they helping? How are they helping black people? Oh, they're arguing on our behalf. They're advocating for us. Bullshit. No, they're not. They're advocating for themselves because they keep getting paid the more they talk about these things, because there's a whole wave of white people who are afraid of being labeled racist and do feel that white guilt. And they feel like they got to do something to help black people because obviously black people can't help themselves. How many black people are sitting around thinking they got to do something to help white people? But there are white people who feel like they got to do something to help blacks. And there are white people who will argue with me for even calling them out on this. I know who they are. I know their names. I'm not going to say it here. But they know who they are. Point number 4. Today's topic, once again, is dissecting critical race theory. Donald Trump had a campaign, or when he ran for president and while he was president, called MAGA, MAGA, Make America Great Again. Now, black people have retorted. Many times I hear when Trump's name gets brought up, somebody says, well, Trump had Make America Great Again. When was America ever great for black people? That's a question that some people have asked rhetorically as a They asked that question as a criticism of Donald Trump. For him even saying that means he's just trying to make it white again. That's what he really means. That's what they have said. So let's address that question. Now, my answer to the question is sourced from Mr. Thomas Sowell. I've mentioned him before on this show. Last name Sowell. Look up his books. He has many. In the period after slavery, but before civil rights, it was about 100 years. Slavery ended 1865. Civil rights was about 1965-ish. Okay, about a 100-year period. In that period, here's what black people did. We built businesses. We built thriving, self-sustained communities. We started families and raised kids with both parents at home. Were there bad things that happened during this period to black people? Yes. The burning of Black Wall Street was one. The creation and the existence of the Ku Klux Klan was another. Jim Crow laws in the South was another. Racism in many places and many examples of it was another. And guess what? With all of these things going on, black people thrived anyway. Black people thrived anyway. None of those things, Black Wall Street burning, KKK, Jim Crow, racism, none of those things stopped the growth and increase of black prosperity. Again, after slavery, before civil rights, before voting rights, black prosperity grew anyway. So when did that growth stop? When did it start going in the other direction? Again, this is not theoretical. It stopped when the government stepped in, offering things like welfare, affirmative action, and a sloppy attempt to make amends, so to speak, for all the bad stuff that America had done to black people. That's when it stopped. That's when we stopped being self-sufficient. That's when we stopped raising kids with both parents in the home. That's when we stopped looking at ourselves and our own communities and started looking at the government. Who led this charge? Who's responsible for this? Was it the government? Is it Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the president at the time? Maybe, possibly to both of those. But you know who really led the charge? Because we weren't, black people weren't that trusting of white people at the time. I mean, we knew who they were, but look what we had already been through. Who actually led the charge were the original race hustlers. The original race hustlers were black men and women. And here's why they did it. They did it because they would gain personal prominence through telling black people that the government owed them something. They were doing it to fatten their own pockets, build their own platforms, and build their own prominence and create power for themselves. These were the original race hustlers. Their whole thing was keep telling black people that the government is wrong and the government owes you something and white people did something to you and they owe you. And that put people in a position of feeling like victims, put people in a position of, oh, I don't need to do it myself. I don't need to do the work. They need to do the work. Let's just rally and protest and talk about what they need to do. And that's all we need to do. And here's the person who told us it. Let's just follow this individual. Let's just sign up for whatever they're doing. Let's buy whatever it is they're selling. Let's show up every time that person is speaking. So that person, that race hustle, was building their platform on the back of making black people feel like victims. This is how it started. This was the start of the decline. The followers, now think about this. The people who decided to follow the race hustler never got all these things that the race hustler told them that the government owed them. All these things that they said the government owes you, they never got it. All right, it's been 60 years. They never got any of the things that the race hustler's been telling them that the government owes. The hustlers got paid and no progress was made. We actually, again, went backwards. There are fewer two-parent homes in the black community today than there was 80 years ago. How is that possible? We couldn't vote. There were Jim Crow laws, and we didn't have civil rights 80 years ago. Now we got all those things, more opportunity, more technology. You can literally be anything you want to be in America now. And we have fewer two-parent homes now than we had 80 years ago. How is that possible? Can't blame the government for that. The hustlers got paid. No progress was made. And look what we have today. The hustlers getting paid, no progress being made. Again, I asked this in a previous episode. This whole thing's supposed to be about change, right? Fighting systemic racism. All right? What change has occurred? Tell me what change has actually occurred. Not what conversation has occurred. Not who has become famous. Not what people are talking about. Not who started a conversation. What change has occurred? As much resources as we have today, as many race hustlers as we have talking about stuff today, as much noise gets made about what needs to be done today, what change has occurred? And since you can't answer the question, that means one of two things. Either A, we are woefully ill-equipped to achieve anything on our own as black people. We're just idiots who can't do anything on our own, and all the white people and government people who feel like they need to help us and do something because we can't do it on our own. Either A, they're right because we can't do shit because we've been supposedly creating change for 5 years at least, and none has been achieved. Or B, somebody's hustling the shit out of us. Well, let me actually not say us, because I ain't getting hustled. Maybe you, and maybe not you either, but somebody's getting hustled. Let's recap today's class, which is, let's talk about critical race theory, dissecting this concept of critical race theory. Now, this being a hot topic, just like I talked about with Black Lives Matter, social justice, and others, this is not actually a new thing, but it's just new that it's into people's consciousness. So let's get into it. Point number one, defining it. Britannica says, critical race theory is an intellectual movement, loosely organized framework of legal analysis based on the premises that race is not a natural biologically grounded feature of physical, distinct subgroups of human beings, but a socially constructed category that is used to oppress and exploit people of color. Critical race theorists hold that the law and legal institutions in the United States are inherently racist insofar as that they function to create and maintain social, economic, and political inequalities between whites and non-whites, especially African Americans. Now, at least I was able to find this definition, but this is the hardest part of critical race theory because people can't even agree on what the definition is because they throw out different definitions based on how they're trying to make it look. Some people say it's just teaching history. Some people say you're teaching hate and the shaming of white people. They're both extremes, but they're so far apart, and this is why we have such a divide on the very topic. CRT is much more slippery than Black Lives Matter because it's a theory, and a theory is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one that is based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. Point number two, the key about CRT is from a tweet by Allison Heat. She says, teachers say I'm not teaching critical race theory. What they really are saying is they're not teaching a theory. They're just teaching facts about the world and its history. But what they view as a fact and which facts they leave in and which facts they leave out and how they talk about those facts are all influenced by the theory. And that is the key indictment of critical race theory, is that it's telling teachers to tell students that policy, government, and systems shape racial imbalances, which leads to a lack of equality, leading to white privilege and all these other things. I'm black and I disagree with this idea because it's indoctrinating black students to lose. It is setting them up as victims and basically telling them that any performance gap between them and a white student is based on the government and not based on their own actual performance and their own lack of gain. It lowers victims, it lowers their expectations, makes them into victims, gives them a built-in excuse, and it leads to them expecting special treatment and different rules. White people, now they feel like they need to condemn themselves just by being white. They need to be pulled down to make the game easier for others, as my sister Latoya said explicitly on Twitter. It's one of the dumbest things I ever heard her say. And I go completely against that because it goes against everything that this whole brand and philosophy is about. If you see someone is further ahead of you, then you need to be incentivized then to work on your game, and you might need to be 10 times better just to get the same opportunity. Listen to the episodes where I talked about this. And point number three, overall issue with critical race theory, even if you agree with it, is that for Black Americans, what's the next step? All right, we have gotten over so many things up to this point, and with this being all the places that I've seen and all the things that I've done, there's no place in America that's better for black people than America. But you may say, well, America still needs to improve and be better for black people. My question is, okay, when are you going to stop pointing at what America needs to do and start pointing at what you and we need to do? And you say, well, we could do both at the same time. No, not really, you can't. Because if your focus is divided, you're not giving your best to either one. So which one are you focused on? What America needs to do or what black people need to do? For the race hustlers, the answer is clear. All right, that's why I did a whole episode on race hustlers so you understand the game that they are playing. The problem with the whole what the government and white people need to do is you want to give unearned advantages to someone who may lack the human capital to even use those advantages, and those advantages get wasted. We have seen this with affirmative action. In businesses, we've seen it with affirmative action in schools, that people are being put in places they have not earned their way into, and then they fail in those situations when had they been left alone to go where they had actually earned their way into, they would have succeeded because they would have been at a level that they actually deserved to be at, not one that they were handed. So when we see race hustlers who have no substance other than reiterating that Trump and the white supremacists and the systems are bad, we're not even using our best human capital now, because those people might be able to come up with something of substance if they weren't so incentivized to be race hustlers. Point number 4, Trump had the MAGA campaign, and so some people derisively say, when was America ever great for black people? I'll tell you when. It was after slavery and before civil rights, when we had businesses, thriving communities, and families with 2-parent homes. It stopped as soon as the race hustler emerged and start telling the government that, and black people, that the government owed black people something. Black people stopped being self-sufficient, stopped having self-accountability, and started looking at what the government needed to do and what everyone else needed to do for them, rather than what we need to do for self. 80 years later, there are fewer 2-parent homes in America now for black people, black America, than there was 80 years ago when there was no voting, Jim Crow laws, and we didn't even have civil rights. How is that possible? Is because we stopped being self-sufficient, stopped focusing on ourselves, and start letting the race hustlers tell us what to focus on, which is everything other than what we need to do. Basically the exact opposite of working on their game. The race hustlers led this charge. The followers never got what they were owed. The race hustlers got paid. No progress was made. And look what we have today. History doesn't repeat itself, folks, but as they say, it rhymes. Send me a text. Tell me the best insight you got from today's class. My number 305-384-6894. Work on your game. Dre all day.